Elijah Boone had risen before the chant of meadowlarks, intent on mending the north fence before the July sun struck like a hammer. At 83, he still walked his acreage with the stubborn grace of a mule, denim shirt faded to the color of far-off thunderheads. Dawn painted the wheat sea gold, but something darker punctured the horizon, a limp shape just beyond a sagging post. Drawing closer, Elijah's heart lurched. The creature was a shepherd mix, pelt matted with blood and burrs, ribs tracing an unforgiving map of hunger. Yet even in its ruin, the dog's eyes glimmered, two embers refusing to die. Beside the hound, 3 kittens, the color of fireplace ash, slept in a warm knot, oblivious to everything except the slow rise and fall of their unlikely guardian's flank. The old farmer knelt, boot soles creaking like tired prayers, and laid a calloused palm on the dog's neck. A faint pulse answered, fragile as a moth's wing beat, but undeniably there. In that instant, Elijah felt the acreage shrink to a single promise: no living soul would be lost on his land today. He removed his straw hat, traced the sign of the cross above the animals, and whispered, "Hold on, friends. The Boone place still keeps its word." The kitten stirred, mewling soft rain sounds, and the dog's tail twitched, an answer, or perhaps a plea. Either way, the covenant had been made.
Years ago, Elijah's late wife, Martha, had warned him that kindness was a gate you had to keep oiled or it would rust shut forever. Remembering her voice, he slid an arm beneath the shepherd's shoulders, feeling wet warmth seep into his sleeve. The animal whimpered, not fear, just the startled confession of an ache that had finally found witness. "Easy now," Elijah murmured, hoisting the dog with a steadiness he reserved for newborn calves. The kittens, startled awake, tumbled from their living blanket and scattered like dandelion fluff before regrouping around Elijah's boots. Their eyes, blue as fresh porcelain, mirrored trust, unearned, yet freely given. He scooped them into his hat, the brim becoming a makeshift crib, and started the slow trek to the farmhouse. Wheat brushed his knees like an honor guard, while cicadas tuned their mid-bass symphony overhead. Every 20 steps he checked the shepherd's breath, counting beats the way he once tallied harvest bushels, each a promise of sustenance through another winter. At the porch, Elijah nudged the screen door with his shoulder, memories of Martha's herbal salves guiding his next motions. Inside, the house smelled of cedar planks and yesterday's cornbread, a sanctuary stitched by decades of small mercies. He laid the dog on a patched quilt, then settled the kittens beside the warm belly they still believed invincible. Time, he decided, would bend to compassion, even if only for an afternoon.
Elijah's veterinary skills were folk art, painted by necessity rather than formal schooling. He fetched a tin basin, warmed rain barrel water on the wood stove, and mixed in salt until it resembled tears. With scissors dulled by hay twine, he cut away crusted fur, revealing a jagged gash along the shepherd's flank, likely barbed wire, maybe a coyote's tooth. He cleaned the wound, every swipe an apology spoken in brine, then packed the trench with honey and crushed comfrey leaf, remedies whispered down by Appalachian ancestors who'd mended both man and beast when doctors were 3 valleys away. The dog endured silently, brown eyes latched to Elijah's weather-cracked face as if memorizing the contours of salvation. Meanwhile, the kittens explored the quilt's faded star pattern, wobbling across constellations stitched during World War II nights when Martha had waited for Elijah to return from the Pacific. One kitten clawed at Elijah's bootlace. Another curled inside the hollow of the farmer's palm, heartbeats syncing with the pulse of a life too stubborn to surrender. When the bandaging was done, Elijah pressed his forehead to the shepherd's and exhaled one syllable: "Stay." It was both command and prayer. Outside, clouds gathered, promising rain that might save the corn. Inside, a hush unfurled,
threaded with the soft motor of feline purse and the ragged metronome of a dog relearning how to breathe without pain.
While the animals rested, Elijah rummaged through the pantry for sustenance. He soaked stale cornbread in goat's milk until it crumbled into a porridge fit for toothless mouths, then drizzled it with the last spoonful of molasses. Sweet energy for kittens who had yet to meet the concept of scarcity. For the shepherd, he thawed venison stew, rich with marrow and potatoes, grown in soil coaxed from stingy earth by 50 seasons of boon sweat. He set the bowls near the quilt, then retreated to the rocking chair Martha once claimed as her reading throne. From there, he watched the fragile procession. First, a gray-striped kitten wobbling toward the cornbread, then its siblings, their hunger a glowing compass. Finally, the dog lifted its head, nostrils flaring, eyes widening at the smell of meat. Summoning strength from some forgotten well, it rose onto trembling forelegs and lapped the stew, each swallow a small resurrection. Elijah's chest ached with a mixture of relief and ancient grief. Every creature he'd saved carried the ghost of one he hadn't. Yet today, at least, the scales tipped toward mercy. Rain began drumming the tin roof, a steady percussion that stitched sky and soil. Elijah closed his eyes, letting the rhythm lull him into a half-sleep where Martha's voice sang lullabies to barn cats and storm-shy horses. The world, for one storm-washed hour, felt repairable. Thunder's low growl roused Elijah. The room was dusk blue, though afternoon lingered outside the storm's veil. He rose to light an oil lamp, its flame lifting shadows from corners like a pastor's hymn. The shepherd, now dozing, twitched as dreams rewound, perhaps chasing rabbits across some pre-injury meadow. One kitten, adventurous beyond its size, attempted the summit of Elijah's rocker, claws pricking denim with polite insistence. He guided the tiny explorer back to safety, chuckling, "Not yet, little mountaineer." The laugh surprised him. It had been months since his throat shaped joy so readily. Folding himself beside the quilt, he inspected the dressing, no seepage, swelling minimal. Survival odds, once slim as a straw, widened. He'd need a name for the dog. Tradition on the Boone farm dictated that rescued animals earned monikers after storms that spared them. Listening to the downpour, Elijah decided Tempest would suit a creature forged under thunder's anvil, yet gentle enough to shelter kittens. As for the trio, he'd call them Drizzle, Puddle, and Squeak, the last named for its fondness of vocal protest whenever siblings stepped on its tail. The farmer penned these christenings in the margin of the seed ledger, beneath rows of figures calculating next season's gamble. Numbers predicted yield, names predicted belonging. Outside, lightning stitched silver branches across the sky, but inside, identity itself became a lantern pushing back night.
When the storm passed, the air smelled of pennies and sliced grass. Elijah opened the screen door, letting cool wind sweep stale heat from the house. Tempest struggled upright and hobbled toward the threshold, gaze fixed on the drenched horizon. Elijah blocked the path gently. Soon, he promised. Freedom, like soil, required the right conditions: healed flesh, steady gait, a heart no longer courting collapse. Instead, he carried Tempest to the porch swing, settling dog and kittens atop a faded Navajo blanket Martha had traded preserves for at a county fair half a lifetime ago. The sky unfurled bands of peach and lavender, sunset straining through leftover rain mist. Kittens pawed at droplets clinging to porch railings, each bead a universe reflecting their copper eyes. Tempest inhaled deeply, chest rising without hitch, and nuzzled Elijah's elbow in wordless gratitude. The old farmer reached into the pocket of his barn coat and withdrew Martha's locket, thumb worrying the dented silver. He opened it to the photograph inside, a much younger Elijah standing beside a milk cow,
Martha laughing as though eternity were a circus act she intended to master. "You'd like these rascals," he told her image. A swallow swooped low, snatching a rain-weighted gnat, and the kittens tracked its arc, pupils dilating with future instinct. Even wounds knew how to convert pain into longing. Even orphans rehearsed the choreography of belonging. Night settled, pricked with stars unmarred by city glare. Elijah carried his guests to the barn's tack room, warmer than the farmhouse once the stove died. He lined a wooden apple crate with straw and the soft checkered shirt he'd worn when courting Martha, a relic suited for royalty of the smallest kingdom. Tempest curled around the kittens, forming a crescent wall of fur and muscle. Elijah latched the door against raccoons, then fetched a transistor radio clinging to life by electrical tape. Static surrendered to bluegrass, fiddle notes danced between hay bales, clean and bright as creek water. He sat on a feed sack, carving a hickory branch into the start of a shepherd's crook, an homage to the dog absorbing outsiders into family with more grace than many people managed. Shavings fell like snow, catching starlight that slipped through knotholes. Occasionally, a kitten squeaked, dreaming battles against imaginary giants, and Tempest answered with a reassuring lick. A moment arrived when Elijah realized his heartbeat matched the radio's tempo. Loneliness, once a house guest overstaying rent, tiptoed off into the barn's darker corners. He breathed in alfalfa, old leather, and the faint copper tang of dried blood already yielding to time. Bluegrass segued into a gospel hymn. Elijah hummed along, voice sandpapery but on pitch, each lyric stitching his ordinary evening into something cathedral-sized.
At dawn, sunbeams threaded barn slats like golden needles. Drizzle batted at moats, Puddle practiced pouncing Tempest's tail, and Squeak mounted a heroic expedition across Elijah's outstretched leg. The shepherd yawned, pink tongue curling, wound evidently knitting beneath fresh white gauze. Elijah prepared breakfast, scrambled eggs for himself, goat milk for the young, and softened leftover ham for Tempest. As they ate, he told stories of the Boone lineage, great-grandfather Silas, who'd freed slaves along the Underground Railroad, Aunt Letty, who'd taught field hands to read beneath cotton moons, Martha, steadfast compass of his wandering youth. Each tale dropped like seed into receptive soil, Tempest's attentive gaze, Kittens' flicking ears. After cleanup, Elijah filled a wagon with hand-picked produce and trundled toward the county shelter 5 miles down gravel roads. He intended to report the foundlings and, if no owner claimed them, sign adoption papers himself. But halfway there, Tempest nudged the kittens closer, eyes wide with alarm at the world rushing past. Elijah halted the wagon. Some creatures, he realized, were not meant for bureaucratic limbo. They had already chosen their kin. Turning homeward, he drafted a new plan. The Boone homestead would simply extend its roster. Extra vet bills meant smaller holiday gifts for distant nieces, but generosity couldn't be bartered against conscience. The wagon creaked back toward the wheat sea, guardians and wards bundled under a burlap tarp that smelled faintly of apples and rain.
Weeks unfurled like ribbon, ordinary yet luminous. Tempest regained full stride, a silver scar the only artifact of pain. He patrolled corn rows by day, herding stray guinea hens with the solemnity of a sheriff. The kittens grew into distinct personalities. Drizzle, contemplative observer. Puddle, chaotic comedian. Squeak, diplomat who ended every tussle by grooming opponents into truce. Elijah built them a climbing gym from cedar limbs, lining platforms with wool scraps Martha had spun on winter nights. Neighbors driving by slowed to witness the barnyard pageant, dog escorting felines along fence tops at dusk, a choreography so improbable it felt like folklore in the making.
Some evenings Elijah read aloud from Steinbeck or the Book of Psalms, pretending not to notice how Tempest's ears perked at familiar cadences. The farm itself seemed to revive, wheat heads fuller, orchard humming louder, even the battered windmill groaning with less complaint. Perhaps mercy, once planted, emitted nutrients invisible to science but vital to soil. On the night first frost silvered the pumpkins, Elijah stood beneath Orion, mug of chicory coffee warming his palms, and listened to the symphony of breathing. His, Tempest's, 3 cats ensconced in coat pockets. "We made it, family," he said to the sky, not expecting reply, yet receiving one in the form of a meteor streaking west to east, a celestial exclamation point on the sentence of survival.
On Thanksgiving morning, the Boone place hosted more life than ever recorded in Elijah's ledgers. Cousins from Wichita, church friends bearing casseroles, children chasing kittens, now sleek and quick as minnows. Tempest wore a red bandana, presiding over festivities with the composed confidence of a creature who has visited the border of oblivion and turned back carrying lessons. Elijah carved the turkey while recounting the rescue, voice steady until he described laying his hand on a pulse faint as moth wings. Then emotion cracked through, raw and holy. Silence fell, broken only by chair leg scraping, as relatives rose to clasp his shoulders. Gratitude, usually whispered, was spoken aloud, filling the dining room until walls blurred with candle glow. Later, when plates were scraped clean and stories spent, Elijah stepped onto the porch. Tempest joined him, resting a scarred flank against old denim. Stars freckled the black canvas overhead. Kittens, now cats, wove figure eights around Elijah's ankles, tails question marks punctuating the night. He inhaled cold air laced with chimney smoke and distant coyote song. In the quiet, he heard Martha, not as ghost, but as wind and wheat, reminding him that kindness once tended keeps opening gates long after the farmer is gone. Elijah smiled, tipping his hat to the fields, to the sky, to the fragile chain of mercies binding every living thing. Then he whispered into the dark, "Gates open, and let tomorrow walk in."